Hi, this is Scott Webster with the Android Guys podcast. I'm sitting here with Luke.
Hey.
What's going on, Luke?
Not much.
You ready to go back in time?
Yeah.
So this is the retrospective hindsight, go back in history look at Android and the various versions and major releases of Android software all the way back. Now, this is our fourth episode for this series, and you would think that we're moving forward pretty far, but in terms of time, we haven't moved that much.
No.
We've just had a bunch of things thrown out there in a pretty short amount of time. The time period we're going to look at today is October 2009. So we're about 1 year into the release of Android after the T-Mobile G1.
Yep.
And Android 1.0, and really about 2 years coming up on the anniversary of Android's kind of announcement.
Sure.
So this is really when things start to kind of pick up. It's October 2009, and we're going to talk about Android 2.0 / 2.1. So this was a big time for Android. It's kind of like the big unofficial coming out party and brand awareness.
Right.
We had the G1, the MyTouch 3G, HTC Hero right around this time. But this is Motorola Droid. This is what shows up and just changes everything.
Yeah, we started seeing the buy-in from the big guys, from the big players in the cell market. And, you know, Android was around for a year. It's almost like those guys were like, okay, we'll see how you do before you hop in with us. And really, I mean, we talked about it last episode, there was no support for CDMA up for a little bit.
Right.
So those guys couldn't even have gotten in if they wanted to.
Sure, unless they did like with their own back-end coding to make it work.
Right.
But at a platform, Android wasn't designed to have CDMA capability.
Right.
And, you know, at the time, I remember doing a lot of writing and covering articles of not just software developers, but handset manufacturers, carriers, and it was just a lot of wait and see headlines. And it was just kind of like, you guys need to get on this. It's going to be bigger than you think. And what are you waiting on? So that was kind of, you know, aggravating as a fan or somebody who really wanted that promise to start to pay off.
Right.
It's like, what are you idiots waiting on?
Yeah.
You know, but that was the fanboy in me.
Yeah. You're the guy with the sandwich board. The end is near.
Right.
And everybody else is walking the other way.
Like, you guys have no idea what's coming.
Right.
And, you know, when you see T-Mobile, who was, you know, fourth in the country in terms of size, you're like, oh, it's kind of like they don't really have anything to lose.
Right.
You know, HTC is a brand that hasn't really established itself on its own. Why not?
Yeah.
And then AT&T starts to get in the rumor mill, and then Verizon, then you look at it and go, okay, so there's some buy-in.
Yeah, it was like T-Mobile was the GSM small fry, and then AT&T was like, all right, well, this will work with us. Let's try it. And then as soon as, you know, Orange took it, Red was like, no. We have to have one too now.
And, you know, it takes, at the time, you know, it was not uncommon for a device to take about 18 months from genesis to fruition. Right. You know, so, you know, it felt like forever for Verizon to get in the pool, but they were looking at it longer than we thought.
Yeah, they did a cannonball.
Yeah, they definitely did because it made a big splash.
Really did.
So let's paint a picture here, like we've done on the other episodes. 2009, we're only a few months removed from the last episode. So we're not moving too far forward.
No.
But just for sake of continuity purposes and what we've been doing, take us back to what life was like in the, you know, late 2009 in terms of pop culture. What kind of movies, TV shows, what was going on?
So this was it just seems. Look at the things on this list of the pop culture movies and TV shows and music, and it just seems like we've said almost every time. It seems like not so long ago, but that was so long ago. Mm-hmm. Top movies of that time were Avatar.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big one, right? That's the, like, wow.
And I mean, it does feel like forever.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, I saw it once and I forgot that I watched that movie. Even like 2 weeks later,
right.
Somebody's like, "Did you go see Avatar?" I'm like,
"What's that movie?"
Not yet. Oh wait, no, I did see that.
Yeah.
That's a completely different conversation for
right.
another podcast.
Right.
But that was.
And the thing, I guess the other, maybe the part of technology that we haven't touched on in this time was. That was like the first movie I saw in like real 3D.
It was.
It was
something.
like it was not, post 3D created
gimmicks flying at the screen.
Yeah, it was
a layer.
It was recorded in 3D.
Yeah,
and so it was like this is what 3D movies could be, and it was that we know now how that turned out, but
right.
it was that time of technology too. So if maybe you don't really care about the pop culture side of it or whatever. It was back when 3D was just getting popular.
Yep. And it was, going to lead into kind of changing televisions within the next year or so. Mm-hmm. And then within another year or two after that, phones.
Right.
Like we even saw, and we'll get into that later, is 3D on a phone.
Right.
For better or worse.
Right.
They were throwing that at it as well.
Yeah.
So this was an interesting time for me. I remember very fondly because it was just kind of like everybody was coming to me going, "Hey, I know about that Android stuff you've been talking about." The Droid is we'll talk about that here in a few minutes, but how that was really kind of confused or conflated with Android.
Yeah.
And what is Droid? And I had to explain to a lot of people that yes, your phone runs Android, but that is not the Droid.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll get on that
here
in a minute.
So,
what else was
so we had Avatar and then Sherlock Holmes. Mm-hmm. So, Tony Stark Iron Man.
Yeah.
Before Tony Stark Iron Man, right? Or no, it was
just after.
Just after. So
but it was kind of like, hey,
it was
Downey Jr.
It was part of the resurgence of Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, he's getting more work again.
And then The Blind Side, which was the Sandra Bullock movie.
Yep.
Got a whole lot of, that book was flying off the shelf after that, and so yeah, those were the movies out at that time.
Gotcha.
Music wise, if we look at Billboard charts, Owl City, Fireflies, Kesha, TikTok. And Jay-Z and Alicia Keys, Empire State of Mind.
See, and again, I say this every episode, feels like forever ago.
Right.
But also feels like, oh, that was just the other day.
Yeah.
A couple weeks or a couple
remember
years.
them playing that at music awards?
Yeah, it was like...
all
of these songs, you couldn't escape them.
Yeah.
They were everywhere.
And then if we go to TV, two debuts that just... for me, one is bigger than the other, but both feel like things that have been around for a very long time. Mm-hmm. American Ninja Warrior debuted. Is like the first, okay, what are these, CrossFit, right? What's CrossFit?
And the obstacle course shows.
Right. So this is like American Gladiator without outfits.
Right.
Or
these are the most fit people.
Yeah, just doing an obstacle course.
Spider-Man show.
Right, and then the other debut was The League,
which is weird to think about some of these shows that came, lived, and went.
Yeah,
and then they're a part of history now.
Right.
So yeah, that was really. That was an interesting. I like that show.
It's a great show.
That was a fun
hilarious. I mean, there's so many comedians that kind of springboarded off that show, or they had been around doing things for a while, but became more widely known.
To see them
like
consistently week
Nick
in and week
Kroll
out.
and Jason Mantzoukas and
Paul Scheer.
Paul Scheer, yeah.
That's
so
yeah. So
good.
that's pop culture, at least in the U.S.
Right.
So this was an interesting time in terms of Android because, and I was thinking about this as we came to recording it, was multiple versions of Android had been released in this year. I mean, we're talking 1, 1.5, 1.6, and 2, all inside of a year.
Mm-hmm.
For seemingly major versions, but when you look at software, if somebody puts out a version 1 and then they put out 2 a year later, that's kind of expected.
Mm-hmm.
So the 1.5, 1.6, those are incremental, but when Android is so young, these incremental things were huge.
Well, because they added many key features each incremental update.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they saved all of the big updates for 2.
Yeah.
It's, they were, okay, now it does this. Now it does, it does this now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it does this now? Like, it was just getting smarter and smarter, right?
Mm-hmm. But you also brought up on the last episode about how this starts to lead to fragmentation discussion.
Right, the big F word.
And how things were so different from device to device. Mm-hmm. And if you were looking for things, it was easy to kind of point at and say, none of these phones run the same software. You're not guaranteed updates. And, it's kind of an easy target.
Right.
Kind of hard to defend.
It was. It definitely was hard to defend. And it was also hard for buyers, too. Because people would go, hey, let me see that Android phone,
right?
And you're like, okay, here it is. Well, that's not Android.
That doesn't do what the other one did.
My friend has this phone, and it doesn't look like that.
Right. How come I can't do this?
Right.
He was showing me X on the phone, and this doesn't look like it does that.
Right.
So that was frustrating because at that time, Android was one of those things where you had to kind of know about it if you're going to seek it out.
Right.
If you want to spend the money on it, invest in it. If you were looking at smartphones, it was Apple's world.
Yeah.
So trying to get into that was, okay, you have to have a little bit of know-how or some kind of understanding of capabilities and features. But then when you do that, you look at it and go, man, this is already, I'm waiting for a software update that I don't know if I'm going to get.
Right.
So 2.0 shows up with a pretty decent amount of features that were added in.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. I mean, it's a major release. And at that time, it arrives with like 2.1 almost immediately after.
Mm-hmm.
But this is Motorola Droid. This was Motorola had previously, as we discussed, thrown some Moto Blur devices, which were kind of, I don't know if you want to say targeted to a younger demographic or a more hip social media savvy kind of user. This thing showed up and it was everything anti-iPhone.
Yeah.
This is all capability, all functionality, all of this Droid does. That was the campaign.
Right.
Versus other phones that can't do certain things. So it showed up in a big way, and with Verizon backing it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And it also comes at a time when Motorola was really kind of struggling.
Yeah.
There were plenty of quarterly reports where they were down. They were rumored to be sold. Somebody was going to pick them up and maybe take their patents and IP. Like, it was just kind of like, what's going on with Motorola?
Yep.
This felt like, hey, we actually have something besides the Razr still left in us.
Right.
And what do you remember of the Droid? Like the campaign, the device? Did you know anybody that had one?
I knew a couple people that had one. When it came out, I think I was working at Circuit City during the time, possibly. Maybe not. But it was big. I remember seeing it and go, oh, this is this is a big phone.
Yep. Angular.
angular, slick looking.
Yeah.
It was cool. And it was powerful. I mean, it was a good phone. It was like, it was really this is the capabilities of Android.
Yeah. Yeah.
Little did we know there was something waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
But it was very, very, it felt like a flagship. It felt like this is, they saved the best for the biggest player.
Yep. Everything felt like precursor to a formal arrival.
Right.
And it felt like, okay, T-Mobile, G1, some of these other devices, it's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But here's what happens when you throw your full weight into it.
Right.
Between a phone maker and a carrier and a version of software that's more capable.
Right.
Let's talk about the software side of things.
Sure.
What were some of the new things that were added into Android? And one of the reasons we do this series is a lot of what we take for granted in today's phone was not always part of Android. Mm-hmm. It was not always part of the experience of something that's in your pocket. Mm-hmm. Things were baked in by carriers, by phone makers, but this is the stuff that was being built into Android at the platform level. So hit me with a few of those.
So first, it was Microsoft Exchange support. So that was huge for business users, people that were using their phones for business, because they were, for the longest time, stuck in the RIM world.
Yeah, it was BlackBerries.
Yeah, because even iPhone didn't have Exchange support at first.
Right.
But this came out and it was I can have my fun phone be everything. It was you were starting to see people going, I don't need a work device and a private device, because this can do everything.
And then even the consumer could say, I can reply to emails and I don't have to sync anything later. I don't have to wonder where that thread is because I sent it from a different device.
Right.
And it was real time. And for better or worse, this is at that point where it's kind of like we can hit you on your phone anywhere you are.
Right.
And that may have changed the workflow and workforce at that point. And also similar, just to piggyback on that, was multiple accounts on your device.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing of, I log in with my Gmail. It's like, can I also do my work?
Yeah.
Yep. You can also add that account to this.
Right.
And start to keep track of them in a separate environment, or the same environment, really, but have them with you.
And you don't have to log out and log back in. I knew a couple people that were doing that.
Which is
like, wow, that's a lot of work.
Almost like doing like a master reset.
Right.
Every time you wanted to kind of go between.
Right.
That's the pains of it at the time.
Yeah. A couple smaller feature live wallpapers. That was a thing that was just like.
So explain what that is, because there was a point where that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And now we don't even talk about it.
Right.
But for a few years it was a thing.
Yeah.
What is a live wallpaper?
So it's, the image on your phone, the backdrop on your phone, whether, it's that nice beach or those geometric shapes, those moved. The wind went through the trees of the palm tree, or that the block, the waves fell crashed down. Yeah. And
stars twinkled.
Right.
Yep.
Just little movement, just to, it is kind of like, your phone's letting you know it's awake.
Yeah.
It's ready.
Like, catch people like, hey, did the clouds just go by? Yeah. They did. The birds. That was. Now they don't even discuss them or talk about them as live wallpapers, but it's one of those things where, today's wallpapers, move if you kind of like just move your handset, or they change with the battery life, or if it's charging. And this was I can put something on here that's not just a static picture.
Right.
And that was a big selling point.
It was huge. But now it seems like a little thing. Camera features like flash,
Yeah. I mean, that was part of the Droid Does campaign was iPhone can't take pictures. Yeah, I forget the exact, and I'll probably butcher it, but that was the thing was like, this has a flash on it, and you could take pictures in a low lit environment or at night.
Well, then also it had white balance, so it wasn't like, take this picture and I'm blue or I'm orange.
Yeah.
Like it's, this can be fixed.
A little more real.
Yeah.
To true to life image.
It looks like my point and shoot, you know, because that's what everybody had.
My 5 megapixel point and shoot.
Right. Yeah. Right. With my micro stick duo.
Yeah.
Proprietary.
Yep. Cameras. Oh man, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Cameras are gone.
Other stuff, you could search in your text messages,
which we do take for granted.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, what? The other day you sent me something. What was it? You know, then just to be able to search for like one of the words you knew that was part of that conversation.
Right.
To kind of pull up and say, oh, here it is.
Right.
Here's the PIN number or the code that you gave me that I need to get into the storage unit.
Yeah.
Or something.
What was that address that you gave me? I can't find it because we text back and forth. There's 1,000 text messages between here and last week. And then this one is one that it just feels like it has always been on a phone forever. Double tap Zoom.
Which also feels like we lived forever without it.
Right.
But it was a year.
I know.
It just kind of felt like, finally, I can double tap to zoom in.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's something that is completely taken for granted that you couldn't do at one point.
Right.
So a lot of people listening, their phone, they may not have ever experienced that.
Right.
You young kids.
Well, and it starts to, you start going down the pathways then of like, this is the beginning of when we have gestures, really, or multi-touch things, things that we're used to doing that have now become universal. For every device does this certain thing, and it's you can tap to zoom on this one. Well, my phone doesn't do that,
right? And it's not just for pictures, but also for like Google Maps and other things that you're like. Yes, this actually feels intuitive. This is what I feel like I should be doing.
Right.
How do I zoom in? Oh, you just double tap. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But that would lead to gestures for things of like 2-finger tapping, swiping down on your home screen and doing things that, would later be added at different levels. But at one point, we lived through the struggle of not being able to double tap to zoom.
Right. And then you could, if we're on photos, you could tap a photo in the contacts then, and then you could pick what to do. It wasn't just, if I touch their name or their face, it calls. It was, you can decide to text them from there or email them. Which
is, again, another one of those things where you don't think about how you do it, you just do it.
Right.
And you don't have to teach people today. They just kind of grab on to their device and say, oh, here's the person, so I'm just going to tap on them.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I want to shoot him an email, or I want to, yeah, that's another interesting one. And just to kind of wrap that up, I see the other note we had here was for contacts. Those you could start to see as suggestions in your keyboard, which is a pretty big deal because if you're starting to talk about people, or if it's your work device and you're using like first and last names or anything where you want to search for people, you can start to put those into messages and emails and things where it would say Scott and then Webster would be suggested instead of just sitting there as Scott waiting for you to finish that.
Right.
And that's, again...
those are just little quality of life changes that just seem like so natural now.
Like you would know it if it was missing today.
Yeah.
You would be like, wait a second, why is this keyboard, why doesn't it have this?
Right.
You don't know until it's taken from you.
Right.
What you could have missed out on.
So yeah, so we have these, all these quality of life improvements and big upgrades, but we mentioned that the Droid was, the really the flagship that came down to it, and I mean, part of that is just the make of the phone.
Yeah, I mean, it showed up out of the box capable of doing these things, and then you would hope that your phone would maybe get it if you have an older Android.
Right.
I mean, and really, when you think about it, a lot of consumers today don't know what version of Android they have. They don't care.
Right.
They don't. There's not so much different between each version that they're like, wait a second, mine doesn't do that. So software updates have become less and less of a thing, even though the fragmentation still does exist.
Sure.
We're looking at multiple years and multiple versions of Android, but to ask somebody what version they run, most people are going to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't care. Android, they won't even know it's a version number.
And then too, those features that are on some devices and aren't on others, most people that don't have certain features don't know.
Yeah, they don't know what they're missing.
Yeah.
Of you don't have digital well-being to track how much you use your apps. No,
why do I need that?
I can. Well, you can actually get an app from the Play Store to do that. Oh, okay, then I'll just do that.
Right.
I don't care.
Right.
So, and this is an interesting thing when we talk about the Droid's hardware, is it was more capable, especially from the software front. It had the hardware. It moved things forward in what felt like a pretty decent leap.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, it really wasn't that much different.
Right.
This is, up until now, most of the devices were 528 megahertz with 256 of memory, 128. Storage would be something in the 256, maybe 512. So this one comes out, it's 600 megahertz.
Right. So
when you go from 528 to 6, that was a big jump.
Yeah.
On paper and in practice, that's a pretty good jump. 256 of memory.
We'd seen that.
512 of storage.
Expandable with micro SD up to 16. We've seen that.
Right. The Samsung Galaxy first phone had 8 gigabytes built into it. So it's kind of like, oh, man. It could have gotten more out of this. But it's one of those things where people don't know. They don't care.
Right.
Battery has moved just a little bit forward. We're at 1390 milliamp hours.
Yep.
Input, again, similar to the G1. You have variety. You can do touch the display. You have a D-pad that when you slide out the keyboard, you've got a physical keyboard with a D-pad that you could kind of navigate around. So it was kind of much sexier, much more polished or finished looking approach to the G1.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the G1 had that matte black. This had a polished silver.
Right.
Gunmetal.
There was no scroll ball, so it was low profile. There wasn't anything sticking out. There was no chin.
It looked like an all business device. I mean, it looked serious, where the G1 comparatively looked like a toy, looked like a prototype.
Yep.
That they didn't this is not the final finish or color.
Right.
Screen size is just a hair bigger at 3.7 inches, but its resolution starts to move forward.
Yep.
And that's a pretty big deal. We had talked in a previous episode about the support for higher resolutions.
Right.
We're now at 854 by 480. On paper, that's a pretty decent jump. And we're starting to get to that point where it's not quite HD.
Right.
So people could still see the difference.
Right.
They're looking at text and emails and pictures. If you zoom in, you can really kind of start to discern that. Camera is 5 megapixels.
Yeah.
With a flash, which is, again, a new feature. And then this has an exclusive on Google Maps navigation. And this kind of goes back to the software.
Yeah.
But this was beta.
Yeah.
What we have as Google Maps.
Yeah.
Do you remember what a big deal that was?
It was huge because everybody used to have a cell phone. People were starting to carry cell phones, but everybody had a GPS in their car then. It was Garmin and TomTom and all these people. That was a space of like, GPS was a really big market for electronics.
And not long before this time, people were still doing the whole printing out MapQuest.
Yeah.
And taking them in their car.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to evangelize Google Maps because I thought it was better looking and more powerful. And at that time it was a fraction of what it is today. But the power of Google Maps, but then this Maps navigation was, let's take this map and give you turn-by-turn directions.
Right.
So, you talked about TomTom and Garmin. What really differentiated this, and I remember even thinking, man, this might be the end for GPS companies.
Right.
It was real-time updates.
Yep.
So roads and things would change from year to year. Google would roll them out.
Yeah.
And you weren't required to plug your phone in or do any type of sync it to a computer. Right. It was, no man, it's in the cloud, baby.
Yeah.
This is the future.
Yeah. It's automatic.
Yeah. And what did you think? Did you have any experience that you remember at that time?
Yeah. So I didn't really travel, much outside of the city I live in.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it really helped me get around because I knew where to go. But it was cool that I didn't need another device. I just remembered thinking, "Oh, that's awesome! I don't need this split cigarette adapter now for two different devices.
Yep,
I can use one."
Yeah, it was cool looking, and it felt like very much like street signs and highway signs, like the colors, the aesthetic, and it was just kind of like, this feels like GPS. It feels, why do you guys have to put beta on this? This feels awesome and polished, but in hindsight, it wasn't, nearly as functional.
Right.
But this was a time where, now everybody plugs their phone in and says, how do I get there? That nobody has to think about turn by turn.
Right.
This was the start of, we can make that possible.
Right.
Anything else that you want to talk about? Because there are two other major devices to talk about here, and this was what really made the time interesting.
Yes.
That 3 different devices, 3 different manufacturers, and kind of like the road really starts to split here and go in some pretty serious directions. Do you want to wrap up Motorola and move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Cool. So, real quick, the Motorola, just like the other ones, this was $200 with a 2-year contract at Verizon. And then at a time, for a while, they were doing like a $100 mail-in rebate.
Right.
I think it might have been $300 without that.
Right.
So I think that was a note we had written down, did require that mail-in rebate. Shortly thereafter, we're talking December, the end of the year. I remember I was with my family looking at Christmas lights at a Christmas tree farm when this thing basically broke cover and was pretty much signaled a pretty big change. Luke, we're talking now about the Nexus One.
Yeah.
I know this is a near and dear phone for you.
Yeah. It was the Google phone, right?
Yeah.
It was the culmination of everything we had wanted.
Yeah. Well, and like we talked about how things hadn't been moving too much hardware-wise. It was all software. It felt like Google came out and said, hey, this is where we think phones should be.
Yeah.
This is the benchmark, a year after the G1. This is where things should be. And they stepped things up significantly, or so it felt at that time.
Yeah.
Again, this is HTC, so this is the same manufacturer as the G1.
Yep.
But it was a much prettier device.
Oh.
No physical keyboards. It was
Right.
touch only, but it had that optical or the trackball
that lit up
for notifications. What a thing that I still miss on today's devices.
I know.
I know screens light up and show me, but I
Yeah.
miss just having that blinking light.
Yep.
Or that color that told you
Yeah.
that's a text, not a missed call.
Right.
HTC Nexus One, this thing shows up. Google makes it available online for $530 unlocked.
Yep.
Or you can find it with a 2-year contract. Not readily available.
No.
It was kind of like, wait a second, how do you expect me to buy a phone through a website?
Right.
What? I don't get it. Like,
Right.
I want to touch it. I want to see it.
Yeah.
Which we don't even think about today.
Right. Yeah, that was, I think, so I ordered one.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest part is there was no hands-on. There was no like, oh, this is what this feels like. I see what it looks like.
Yep.
But is it good? Does it feel good in my hand? Like,
Right.
Spoiler alert, yes. But yeah, it was the first time that, at least American customers for the most part were buying phones sight unseen without actually touching them, because very much the norm was you're going to your carrier's store and they show you the device and then you get your own.
You're stuck with their options.
Mm-hmm.
This one was unlocked, and it was like, hey, do you want to take this to T-Mobile or AT&T?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do here? And I remember at the time, you could also customize that one, right?
Yeah, you sure could. You put your name on the back.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
I remember running into you at Chipotle.
Yeah.
And I said, let me see it.
Yeah.
You handed it to me, and man, that was... I couldn't look at my G1 the same after that.
It was thin.
Yeah.
Sleek.
Yep.
Smooth.
Curved.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they could put today's hardware in a G1 or a Nexus One body, I might like it still.
Yeah.
Now, it's a 3.7-inch screen.
Yep.
So that's, about 40% of what today's screens are. And size-wise, it just felt right, though.
It did.
It felt, like, spacious.
Well, and I remember the other thing I was worried about was I was used to a full QWERTY by that point.
Yeah.
My devices had a full QWERTY, so I was just like, I'm going to go to a touchscreen only device.
It's going to slow me down for texts and emails.
Yeah. How is this going to work? But yeah, I mean, it was fast.
Yeah. Well, and that's likely because it had 512 RAM, where, that was kind of like, well, it's got a half a gig of memory. And more importantly, it was a Qualcomm Snapdragon S1 chip.
Yeah.
Which is a gigahertz.
Yeah.
Which is twice the processor speed. And actually, benchmarks will probably tell you it's much quicker. I don't even remember what it is. But to go from 528 to the 1 gigahertz was just leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
And it felt like it's kind of like looking at video games you look at as a kid. It's never going to get better than this.
Right.
This game looks so real.
It's so fast. Switching between apps is so fast. Wow, this phone is so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great device. I mean, the battery life.
Well, that was 1,400 milliamp hours, so that was still kept moving forward. The screen display was about the same as the Droid at 800 by 480.
Yep.
So you're still in that higher resolution. And I remember seeing that compared to the G1 was like, ooh, look at your pictures compared to mine.
Right.
5 megapixel camera with a 2x zoom.
Right.
Digital zoom.
Yeah.
But the idea that you can kind of pinch and pull or kind of zoom in.
Trackball.
On your. Oh, that's right.
Trackball zoom.
Just roll it up.
Yep.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
What a life.
I know.
720 by 480 video, so it gave you the capability of shooting HD video.
Yeah.
On the phone.
Yeah.
We would find out later that people weren't ready to buy these phones.
No.
People didn't know they existed, and people just didn't feel comfortable buying devices sight unseen.
Yep.
And Google would try various things with its storefront for a while.
Yeah.
But this was the first time where it was just kind of like, hey, I know you're not ready for this, but your kids are going to love it.
Right.
It's like we see something coming.
Yeah.
We just happen to we got here too early.
Yeah. which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
You know, like they were so far ahead of the market.
Yeah.
In terms of buyer interaction, customer interaction, customer progression.
Expectations of like retail. Like,
right.
People were really just starting to understand that they can buy shoes and clothing and
online.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon, I'm getting more than just books now, and I don't know if I want to buy that rug because I don't know what it feels like or how thick that is.
Or if I don't like it, how do I send it back?
Well, and more importantly with a phone, if this thing doesn't work or I'm having trouble, how the heck do I get service?
Where do I take it?
Yeah, so we get it, we see why, but who knows where we would be if people were ready for it at that time.
Right, yeah.
But Luke, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, they're as good as that phone was, and you know, I think it's clear to see to me it was great. There was another phone at that same time that
January, this would have come out just a little bit after the Nexus One. And I remember I was at CES for this. Back when they used to announce phones at CES. And I remember going to this press event. Samsung Galaxy S.
Yeah.
We'd already seen the Samsung Galaxy, but this was the S, and this was the start of the line that still exists today.
Right.
Samsung came out and it was, hey, we have something that's even more capable, really, potentially or objectively prettier, and we're going to make it available through all the carriers
to everybody.
Yeah, so that was, and we'll talk about this here in a moment. They went about it in a really weird way.
They did.
The industry was positioned in a really weird way.
Yes.
Real quick with the specs, we're talking another 1 gigahertz processor, but this had a Samsung Hummingbird chip.
Yep.
So that was its own proprietary. Same half a gig of RAM. Again, now we're back at Samsung, so we're looking at 8 gigabytes of storage and 16 gigabyte options, expandable with up to 32. So, I mean, at that point, you're like, dude, it's every song I ever
owned.
Right. It's every picture I'll ever need. 5 megapixel camera. This thing had a massive 4-inch display.
Yeah.
So it really, I mean, you're talking from 3.5 to 3.7 to 4. That's sizable upgrades.
With Gorilla Glass, which is our first, dip into this whole puddle.
Yeah. We're looking like 5-6 generations later.
Yeah.
This is that. What does that mean? No, you have to beat your phone up a little bit to scratch it, or
because before it was phones were you get one drop and that's gone. Especially because it was becoming, these screens are getting bigger. They don't fold to protect themselves.
Also, this is a time when manufacturers for cases weren't making too many things for Android because it wasn't worth their R&D or their investment to say, we're going to throw our weight behind this phone.
Yeah, it's not worth the mold price for us.
Or how do you throw something with a sliding QWERTY keyboard?
Yeah.
What do you put that in?
Yeah. You're seeing a lot of 2-piece cases and stuff.
Yeah. Pouches,
Yeah.
But, people would drop their device and they would learn, oh my gosh, this $200 phone, actually, they want to charge me $600 to replace it.
Right.
So that's, the Samsung Galaxy S in terms of hardware. It also had Galaxy apps where they kind of preloaded some things that kind of help you with your day. Samsung would start to put their own approach to like calendars and clocks and email and music players and things that kind of want to pull you into the Samsung ecosystem.
Yeah, it was the beginning of bloatware.
Yeah, and I mean, it really was. And Samsung and others would get so bad about it. Samsung even came out later and said, we need to dial back. We need to get to where we're not offering so many like dual versions of these things.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a conversation that was held with Google that said, hey, if you want to, keep going this route with Android, here's what we'd like to see.
Yeah.
But it was just trying to keep you under Samsung's umbrella.
Right.
Now, at 9.9 millimeters, this was the thinnest phone on the market.
Yeah.
So that was really, it felt razor thin.
It really did.
Now this is an interesting time because for the first Galaxy S and even the second later, more confusion when it came to understanding Android. We already had people that would just come up and ask you for your G1, is that a Droid? Is that a... And really they're asking, is it an Android phone? But if you want to be pedantic, you would say, no, dude, this is the T-Mobile G1. The Droid is a Verizon phone. Let's mix that up with Samsung Galaxy S, because Samsung positioned it as a Galaxy S phone, but you couldn't go to your store from your carrier and say, I want the Galaxy S. They would maybe know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But T-Mobile would sell you the T-Mobile Vibrant.
Right.
Which is truly a Samsung Galaxy S family.
And then your buddy gets the Vibrant, and you walk into AT&T and say, can I get the Vibrant, the Samsung Vibrant? And they're like, no.
We don't carry that.
Well, no, that's it right there. Oh, you mean the Captivate?
Yeah. Right. And
wait,
then
what?
Verizon's was the Fascinate.
Right.
And all of these phones they weren't the same body. So even a case maker couldn't put out one case because the headphone jack was here, the microphones were there, the volume rocker was on this side, or the button was just below. So there's that. But then Sprint's version of the Galaxy S had a physical QWERTY keyboard.
Right.
It was the only one that had that. So it was just like the Sprint Galaxy S Epic 4G. Yeah. It was the whole name for that thing. Right. It was such a mess, and it was so hard to defend that and explain that to people. Because people were like, oh, I want that Galaxy phone, the Galaxy S. And you're like, no, you want to go, make sure you ask for the Captivate. Yeah. Because you're going to get in there, and they're going to try to sell you a Motorola phone or a Backflip.
I want a Fascinate, not a Droid.
Right. Well, the Droid is a more powerful phone, or it's got a keyboard. Yeah. Yeah. So that, I mean, it really... And that, again, goes to the fragmentation conversation of Android as it's a plethora of choices, but is it too many choices? Right. Like, I don't know which one's right for me. Right. And at that time, there were so many things of like, okay, now these things are starting to fill up the pipeline. Well, what if I just wait? Because I heard that this is coming out. If you were paying attention to the space, you knew that there's always something right around the corner. Right. So it was just like, well, I might as well just wait. It's kind of like buying a computer at that time.
The other thing that we skipped over, we're talking about features on the S. Yes. Is the front-facing camera.
Yes, I didn't even. I completely glossed over that here in the notes. That was a major. I mean, that was the first time we could do selfies.
Well, and see what we were taking
picture of a selfie.
You know, you had to be good at like knowing to turn your phone. Like, all right, I know. What the angle of my face is.
This way, it should get both of us. Yeah. That's again, that was a Samsung thing because it wasn't designed, and Android didn't have that built in. There were some other Samsung models that were released right around this time. We won't talk about any of the specs, but it just out of nowhere, it was like there were 4 Samsung Galaxy S. And then we also had the Stratosphere, the Indulge, the Proclaim, the Infuse, and it was just...
all Android.
And you know what's interesting for me personally? I liked it better when everything had its own name. Yeah. You knew the difference of like, oh, that's the Infuse. Now it's just the new generation of this. And let's just call this the K50, the K70. It's like, it's not... No, give it a name. Give it something fun. Sure. This whole time period, we're talking from like October to January, was just, hey, you want Android? Yes, here you go.
Yeah, the ball's rolling. This is staying now. There's many choices for you.
Yep. I think that's about it for me here. Yeah. I know we talked at length about different things, but... Luke, anything else you wanted to throw in there before we wrap this up?
No, I think it was just that last note is now we're seeing wide market Android adoption, and things are really starting to gain some momentum and gain some speed, and you're seeing just more and more of this Android being widely known, and it's exciting.
Yeah, brand awareness, platform awareness. Carriers seem to get it. Consumers are starting to see commercials.
Yep.
And it's just kind of like, oh, finally. I've been talking about this for almost 2 years, and now you guys are starting to smell the coffee.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for me. Luke, this was fun.
Yeah.
Let's jump forward here for the next episode. We're going to move about 6-7 months.
Yep.
Again, not a major jump forward, but we're going to come back for May 2010.
Yep.
See you guys.
See ya.